No, that's awesome because you hit all the big time WWF markets, and obviously Pittsburgh falls right into that territory, especially
Yeah.
during that era. I mean, you really can't get any bigger than a WWF house show. I mean, just to go to that was an experience. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. But there's a little bit of a stretch that comes up that I find to be very interesting, and maybe I'm looking a little more into it, but I'm just kind of curious here. So now your father's health, was that starting to turn towards the end of 1990? Because there's a couple weeks stretch where you're not on any shows. And I wondered if that was exactly when you kind of had to maybe start looking at what was going on the home front.
Yes. I don't remember the date, but I'm sure if they had archives, you could go back and find. I remember it was in Portland, Maine, and I had grown up. My dad was 48 when I was born. So I was a late life baby to him, and his only son. So like I've mentioned so many times before, my dad was like a real life superhero. I started to do things that I would later find out that he never told me. After he died, I find out he's a Silver Star, Double Bronze Star recipient, which apparently means you're one hell of a fucking soldier. Um, my dad never told me those things, but I called home pretty much every day, 2 days, and my stepmother, who was, not the most outwardly emotional person, was crying. And I grew up with this morbid fear that something would happen to my dad. The reason for that was I had 3 or 4 friends that their dads had dropped dead at 41, 42 years old. So here's my dad, in his 60s when I'm in high school, and then, going into the road and is, starting to push into his 70s. And there was always this concern that, I mean, you could tell dad was slowing down and, he was getting older. Uh, so when she answered the phone and she was crying, my heart dropped. I thought, oh my God, something happened to my dad. And she wouldn't say much on the phone. She just told me he won't go to the hospital. And I know how my dad was. My dad would, talk about stubborn. Even that stubborn gene comes legitimately to me. But so I went to Vince. I was supposed to work with Mike Rotunda that night, and I went to Mike and told him, and went to Vince, and Vince said, go, we'll cover for you. And Pat Tanaka, you couldn't do this today with TSA after 9/11, but I think I had like 13 minutes to make the flight. And we come out of the building, jump in the car, and to compound matters, my gear, we had driven up from Boston. We were staying in Boston. So I had to hop from Portland to Boston, Boston to Pittsburgh. And we came out of the building. The traffic was, about that time of day, the traffic was really bad. And Pat drove up onto the sidewalk, down the city street on the sidewalk, through a city park to get to the clearing, and, on the other side to get to the road. We got there just as the door was closing. I ran to the airport straight past like, again, you couldn't do it today. Made the flight and made it home. My sister and brother-in-law met me at my dad's house. And, because of my background of wanting to be a doctor at that time, I hadn't yet begun prep for medical school, but I had done a lot of that in high school and college. And so I went in and I just started going down the things that I could think of off the top of my head, heart attack, stroke, what was going on. And he said he had no pain in his head, no pain, tightness in his chest or shoulder. But I noticed as he was sitting there, I looked down and his fingernail beds were like blue, like almost as blue as my shirt. And when I knelt down, because his head was down, I knelt down, looked at him, and his lips were the same color. So I knew he wasn't transferring oxygen. He wouldn't go in an ambulance. We got him out to my brother-in-law's van, and that started that whole trajectory with Dad's health. And I was off the road for some time, and the reason for that was when we got him to the hospital, they rushed him straight back, and we were all sitting in the waiting room waiting. And the doctor came out and he said, "Well, you certainly got him here in the nick of time." And him saying that, like, I was able to exhale. I thought, well, whatever's wrong, they're fixing it. And then, like the next, for anybody that hasn't lost their parent, it's a horrible experience. And he said, well, he's not out of the woods. He has stage 4 emphysema, he's got 3 to 5 days to live. And like, I honestly, God, didn't believe I heard what I had to ask, excuse me, it totally missed me. And when he said it again, it honestly felt like the entire room shifted. And I just couldn't believe that this superhero was going to die. And the old bastard, you know, I've got pictures of him at that from then in the hospital, and he looks like he's a corpse. I mean, it's horrendous. And but you know, 3 to 5 days come and go, and the doctor said, well, maybe he's got 2 weeks. Well, then 2 weeks come and go, and he's getting stronger, and you know, was pretty much out of it for the first week, 10 days, and then you know, so he hit bottom and started coming back up. You know, ended up like 33 or 4 days in the hospital, and he's going home. So it was sometime after that. It wasn't immediate, but some short time after that, I went back on the road, and that was whenever I had the discussion with Vince. I believe it was Niagara. In my head, I've got it as Niagara Falls. And we were off in the building. There was, you know, like an adjoining part of the building that was like a convention center area, great big open rooms. And Vince and I went in there and spoke for some time, about an hour. And, you know, I gave him a complete update as to, you know, a lot more in depth than what I had just said here. And he sat and listened the entire time. He never rushed me. And he, at the end of that, he, you know, started talking about, you know, family and what family means. And, you know, put his mother over huge to me, said she was a saint. You know, just that kind of back and forth conversation, just like, you know, two guys sitting and bullshitting. And at the end, he said, you know, you've been a great employee. The door's always open. You're welcome to come back anytime. But you go home and you take as much time as you need. If you want to come back, the door's open. If you can't come back, I understand. And he wished me and my dad best of luck. You know, so whenever I went back there in '95, it's worth telling that what I just said, because I went in there believing, hey, I was a good employee back then. He liked my work, and the door was always open. So when I went back there in '95 with the promise of the top heel spot, I was completely blindsided by the paychecks and all the other bullshit that went on. And you know, I've often said, given the two tenures, 90 or 95, 90 with no spot, guaranteed just a mid-card guy, or 95 being the quote-unquote top heel, I would take the 90 mid-card spot 99 times out of 99.
The parallels just between Vince, of the one you saw in '95 and the one you're talking about in 1990, it's astounding. I mean, that's what we've heard about. That's what we've heard about. You know, the old Vince is a little different, but you know, that was the end of October, and then you get back on the road into about the middle of November, and John will talk about that TV taping in a minute. But did you kind of have an inkling when you came back on the road in the middle of November that your time with them was pretty much going to be predicated on the health of your dad and where he was going to be going?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the reason I said earlier about being dad's only son, he's got 5 kids, 4 daughters and me. And he loved all of us equally. But, you know, being from that generation, it was, if I need to go to the doctor's appointment, my son will take me. If I need a procedure done, my son will take me. Not that he didn't trust his daughters. He loved them every bit as much as me. But he knew that my background in medicine and my interest in medicine, and you know, something like that was like, this is what men do. You know, we have to go over here and, you know, keep this away from the women so that they don't see, you know, the procedures being done. You know, very, very old school in that respect. So I knew that, you know, Dad having stage 4 emphysema. If anybody knows, and I'm sure a lot of people out there do have loved ones with COPD. So being a scrub, and if he would happen to leave that on and forget and walk away and light a cigarette or leave the stove running, could be catastrophic. So pretty much people that are on oxygen 24 hours a day, they're told, the family is told that they shouldn't be alone. And being that all my other sisters were married, and two of them lived far away, and the fourth sister was younger, 6 years younger than me, 6 or 8 years younger than me. So it pretty much fell on me that if if somebody would need to be there with Dad, it would have to be with me. And I was only too happy to do that. All of our parents, do way more than we realized when we were younger for us, and so there was no question about it to me. If Dad needed help to be taken care of, I was going to be there to do it.
What were your thoughts of kind of getting back on the road? And obviously he's still ill at this point, but getting back on the road and getting back in the WWF, what were your thoughts? Were you, nervous the whole time? Were you just going to jump right in? Were you very cautious about heading back in?
Yeah, when you're at that stage of your career and really working hard to learn your craft, it requires 100% of your attention. You can't, you shouldn't go in. And I was finding on a pretty regular basis, instead of concentrating on the match or where the match was or, what we're going to do tonight, I was worried about, like, do I have time to make a phone call home to check on Dad? Do I have time to call my sister to see if she stopped over there today while I'm gone? It was, your brain is obviously half at home, if not more. And it really was like divided loyalties. Like I'm trying to focus on my career, but no matter how hard you focus, for anybody that's had a loved one that's gone through this kind of thing, understands exactly what I'm talking about. There's a constant worry and the fear there. And there's also a part of the back of your brain that's hoping, maybe just maybe Dad can get better. Not better like back to full health. But in that case, in Dad's case, the 3 to 5 days ended up being 2.5, almost 3 years before it had developed into lung cancer. And, which is a complete different story episode. But, when you say that, you hear the phrase greatest generation, that ain't no bullshit. Those people were cut from different cloth. Dad was a million times tougher than I could ever imagine being. To come back from stage 4 COPD, emphysema, which apparently what I was told is makes your lungs almost like tissue paper, and to come, to be told you're going to live 3 to 5 days and then live, almost 3 years past that, pretty much speaks for what a tough old birdie was. And, there was during that last couple of years, there was a lot of times that, any old person gets testy, right? And Dad was no exception in that case. But I learned a lot more about my dad than I had ever known before in those last 2.5, 3 years that he was there. So, it was a lot of work. I would do it 100 times over. I relish that time that I have with my dad. And I think that's why when you see the NWA belt throwdown, when I say the "Here we go, Dad," I didn't go out and say, "I'm going to say this because it was a year and a week ago that Dad died." That was a million miles away from my attention at that time. But at that moment, I felt my dad, and that's why I said it. It just blew into my head, and that's why because that last 2.5 to 3 years that he did stick around. I got to know my dad a lot deeper in a lot different ways than I had known him before. Instead of being that authoritarian, larger than life figure, I got to know him as a human being, if that makes sense. Instead of just, that superhero dictating or, that's where I learned, yes, sir, yes, ma'am. Always thank you, you're welcome. Those are the things that my mom and dad drilled into me, and it came largely from my dad's military background. So that was who the young Troy Martin looked up to. The Troy Martin that was now taking care of his father was seeing him as a human being as a man on a man-to-man basis. And like I said, got to know my dad in ways that I never thought I would ever get to know him. And, you know, to see somebody's mortality, especially when it's your parent, is a really, really tough thing. Um, Damnedest toughest thing I've been through in my life. Uh, you know, and would walk through fires to have been able to avoid that. But like I've often said, as horrible of an experience as it was watching my dad decline and ultimately pass away, I wouldn't have missed it for all the gold in the world. Uh, because of the opportunity to get to know my dad in ways that I wouldn't have gotten to had that illness not come, I believe. And you know, so it's, you know, like life is a, you know, strange thing as we sort of meander through it, right? And we're, you know, we all take it day by day and milepost to milepost. But that was something as a young man, as a kid, I never thought I'd ever see in my dad. I could never imagine my dad dying. He was just a legit superhero. You know, 28-inch waist and a 48-inch expanded chest. Worked from sun up to sundown like an animal. Mortality, my dad, not possible. And then you see it happen, and you know, requiring him to rely on you for simple things like driving him to the store or helping up and down the steps, things like that. I didn't see my dad as a frail, ailing guy. I saw my dad as a human being for the first time in my life.